So thank you so much for joining us. Good morning, but also good afternoon and good evening. We are spanning across the world for a truly global webinar today. So really appreciate your participation. And I'd also like to say that this is a follow-up in terms of conversation that the Basel Institute is having with regards to what we held in June and early July, which was the 4th International Collective Action Conference. My colleagues will be sharing a link to the report that was written back in the summer. And this was really a way for us to continue the conversation about multi-stakeholder engagement and specifically anti-corruption collective action. Also, we had this conference only in person, so we know that quite a few people have reached out because they were interested in joining the conversation but couldn't make it to Basel. So before we begin, I'd also like to thank the Siemens Integrity Initiative that is supporting us in terms of this work and the conference, but also this webinar, and especially Sean Texera and Sabine Zindera, who I believe are with us today. So thank you once again. My name is Vanessa Hans. I'm the head of private sector at the Basel Institute on Governance, and I will be moderating this panel today. I'd just like to remind you of a few housekeeping rules. So basically, we have set up a Q&A function. So please feel free to ask your questions via the Q&A. We will be monitoring this and also look at your questions as we go along, but we'll be saving some time towards the end to respond to any of your questions. Also, the session is currently being recorded, so we will be sharing the recording of this webinar later on for a wider audience and also on our social media channels. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists today. So we really wanted to bring together people from different backgrounds, I would say, but all connected to collective action in different ways and representing the different stakeholders that we believe are essential in the talk in preventing corruption. So first off, I'd like to introduce Vitor Geromel, who's a legal analyst in the anti-corruption division at the OECD. So he is also working on the OECD Working Group on Bribery and will be sharing his experience with us. Before the OECD, Vitor was at the Federal Prosecutor's Office of Brazil. So welcome, Vitor. We're very happy to have you with us today. Then we have Daniela Santana Silva, who is the head of the Department of Cooperation and International Affairs at the Office of the Comptroller General of the Republic of Chile. Daniela is involved in the Executive Directorate of the Latin American and Caribbean Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions and the coordination of the Anti-Corruption Alliance ANCAC Chile. Thank you so much, Daniela. And we're happy to have you back because Daniela was also one of our speakers during our conference in Basel. We also have with us joining from Nigeria, Soji Apampa, who is an international corporate and political governance expert. Many of you know him because of his several hats that he's wearing in the collective action space, but he has served as a senior advisor to the UN Global Compact on the 10th principle and also advised the governments of Nigeria on its national strategy to combat corruption. He co-founded the Convention on Business Integrity, a project launched in Lagos in 1997 to promote ethical business practices, transparency, and fair competition in private and public sectors. So he'll be speaking a bit more about that later on. And last but not least, joining us from Thailand, we have Vibeke Lyssand Leirvag. And Vibeke is the founder of Felicia Design, a leading high-end jewelry manufacturer based in Thailand. Felicia Design focuses on sustainable jewelry production and is certified under the Responsible Jewelry Council. Felicia Design has also joined and been certified by the Thai Private Sector Collective Action Against Corruption. So we're really happy to have both representative of the private sector, public sector, but also international organizations with us and civil society. And we just wanted to get started and have this conversation as as a way to bring in the perspectives of all of the different stakeholders. And for that, I'd like to turn it over to Vitor and ask you, why is anti-corruption collective action so important for the OECD?
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I hope you can you hear me? Okay, good. First of all, I would like to thank the Basel Institute, Vanessa and Anna for the kind invitation. It is a great pleasure to be here today. I would also to greet my colleague speakers, Daniela, Soji, Vibeke, and of course, all of our audience today. I'm sure we'll have a very good discussion. Well, to begin, to answer your question, Vanessa, I'll begin with a very brief presentation of the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, the anti-bribery recommendation, and the monitoring of their implementation by the Working Group on Bribery, and how collective action fits in all this. After that, I'll give a concrete example of the importance of encouraging collective action initiatives when raising awareness of corruption in SMEs. Well, the OECD Convention on Combating Bribery of Foreign Public Officials in International Business Transactions, and here we use the short name, the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, was adopted in 1997. The convention prohibits bribery of foreign public officials in international business transactions, covering sanctions, corporate liability, jurisdiction, enforcement, international cooperation, among other issues. The convention was completed in 2009 by the 2009 recommendation of the Council for Further Combating Bribery, and here we'll use the short name Anti-Bribery Recommendation, which is intrinsically linked to the convention. The Anti-Bribery Recommendation therefore seeks to strengthen the implementation of the convention and further enhance the fight against foreign bribery by recommending measures to better prevent, detect, and enforce foreign bribery laws. The monitoring of the implementation of both the Anti-Bribery Convention, the recommendation, and other related instruments is done by the Working Group on Bribery through a rigorous and systematic country monitoring process. And here, just to talk a little bit more about the Working Group on Bribery, the Working Group on Bribery is composed of the 44 countries signatories of the Anti-Bribery Convention, which includes the 38 OECD member countries plus 6 other countries that are not OECD member countries, which are Argentina, Brazil, Bulgaria, Peru, Russian Federation, and South Africa. By the end of 2018, the working group decided to update and expand the 2009 anti-bribery recommendation by reflecting evolving challenges, good practices, and cross-cutting issues. The extensive review process of the recommendation took nearly 3 years to complete and benefit from broad engagement with external stakeholders from the private sector and civil society, with written consultations on 2 occasions and several oral exchanges between consultation partners and the working group. The Basel Institute, of course, participated actively in this process. In December 2021, the OECD Council adopted the revised anti-bribery recommendation, and that's why you will hear a lot about the 2021 recommendation, which is actually a revised version of the 2009 OECD anti-bribery recommendation, with a series of updates and new provisions. One of the innovations brought by this process was the endorsement by the working group of collective action as a tool to prevent and fight foreign bribery. In fact, according to the Basel Institute, the 2021 recommendation is the first key international standard to explicitly recommend the use of collective action to address bribery. And how does it do it? The 2021 anti-bribery recommendation encourages collective action, including through public-private partnerships in several sections, namely awareness raising of foreign bribery to the private sector, addressing demand side of bribery, and actions by business organizations and professional associations. The fact that the anti-bribery recommendation now recommends countries to resort to collective actions, especially in their awareness-raising activities to the private sector, it's very encouraging for a variety of reasons, but mainly because the WGB, the Working Group on Bribery, will now be able to assess in its country monitoring process whether and how its member countries are incentivizing and taking part on collective action initiatives. That said, this brief explanation of our framework, I would go to the concrete example I mentioned earlier. Collective action is actually an important tool in raising awareness and preventing corruption in SMEs. And I'll give you a bit of context of this. The working group country monitoring reports adopted over the past decade show a constant struggle of government authorities in reach out to SMEs with awareness-raising initiatives. The struggle has translated into recommendations by the working group to member countries that were often considered partially or not implemented. In order to help government authorities and other relevant stakeholders as well, such as business organizations, civil society organizations, large companies, and professional associations, to reach out to SMEs with awareness-raising initiatives, the OECD is developing, with support of the government of Sweden, a toolkit for raising awareness and preventing corruption in SMEs. The toolkit will be launched officially late next month during a webinar on promoting business integrity in SMEs. You are, of course, all invited to attend. I will come back to you with the exact date and registration details as soon as we have them defined. The toolkit will provide examples of successful initiatives government authorities, business organizations, professional associations, civil society organizations, and also large companies have adopted to assist SMEs to understand their risk exposure and implement the adequate anti-corruption measures. It is based on extensive background research, views collected by the OECD Secretariat from relevant country authorities, and interviews with anti-corruption compliance councils and specialists from several countries. The goal of the toolkit is to present a compilation of tried and tested awareness-raising initiatives that have proven effective in specific countries and industries. And you might be asking yourself, how collective action, where collective action fits in all that? Well, the toolkit encourages relevant stakeholders to incentivize and take part in collective action, including through public-private partnerships, as a highly effective way to reach out to SMEs with awareness-raising initiatives. The toolkit shows many examples of the effective use of collective action initiatives to promote anti-corruption standards in SMEs. Well, Vanessa, I hope my answer could express the importance of collective action as a part of the OECD anti-bribery recommendation and also its potential effectiveness in practice, fostering awareness-raising initiatives to SMEs. And of course, I'm open to your follow-up questions.
Thank you very much, Vitor. And obviously at the Basel Institute and many people here joining us today were very pleased with the 2021 recommendations. But it's also great to note the importance now of focusing on SMEs and the increasing importance of SMEs in the work that the OECD does. So we are looking forward to receiving the toolkit, and I'm sure we'll be able to help support promoting it. And later on, we'll obviously turn to Vibeke, who is leading an SME. So it'd be also great to hear her perspective and the practice of the benefits of the different initiatives that she's involved in, and some more, I would say, on the ground knowledge that she'll be sharing with us. But for now, I'd like to turn it on to Daniela. So Daniela, we'd be really interested to hear how the Office of the Comptroller General of Chile engages with the private sector. And specifically, how do you engage with anti-corruption collective action? Because I know this is something that you've been focusing on for a while now. So I'm turning the floor to you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, everyone in Basel. I think Vitor did an amazing job in saying hi to everyone. I just want to acknowledge what he said. And so I don't take much of your time. I'm really glad I'm here with you guys today and to hear, well, Vitor, I'm looking forward what our colleagues are going to address now. We at the Office of the Comptroller General, we are what we are called a Supreme Audit Institution. And for us, it has been kind of a struggle to actually talk about integrity and, fighting against corruption, because there's a lot of voices that say that's not part of our mandate. So for us, driving from international standards, and particularly the latest UNGAS declaration on anti-corruption, the special session of the General Assembly, that particularly states that we have a role on fighting corruption, it's really important for us. Because usually we're just thought about audit institutions that do actually only financial audits. That's like, when you think about Supreme Audit Institutions, that's what comes to mind. but we are kind of working on developing our mandate. And I'm glad to be here today to share a little bit of what we're doing today. So I think Anna is sharing her screen. No, Lisa. Thank you for helping me. What we find is, but mainly, but there's more. I just wanted to put it like this, like some benefits of engaging with the private sector for us. So there are three main things: agility, technology, and collaboration. So as you all know, corruption changes very rapidly and demands that we may anticipate its latest manifestations. And so we need to be agile. And sometimes that's not as easy in the public sector as it might be in the private sector. So it's actually something really a benefit for us to engage with the private sector. And I'll be going back a little bit on that when we look at why do we need to actually engage in the private sector, because for us, it's not only like a requirement or something that's good for us to do, but it's something that we need to do. The other thing is technology. We need to exchange information, and right now with all the data sort of revolution that we are facing, and also the position that the pandemic put us, like we were forced on working remotely, for instance, and exchanging databases, and we need to exchange information, and we can do that with the private sector as well. We do not only have to be focused on the public sector to exchange information between institutions, because we all do have a role to play in this. And the third thing is collaboration, because of course, to complex problems, you need complex solutions, and the only way those solutions will come from is if we collaborate and work together and incorporate the view that private sector has, public sector has, but also academia and civil society, and so the other sectors. And if you help me, Lisa, with the next slide, please. I just did like sort of an exercise where we as like public sector can mirror the private standard, and where the private sector can mirror the public standard. So this is the first exercise, and I'm really glad Victor is here, because, well, we're talking about some, the Anti-Bribery Convention, but this is really important for us as well. When we're talking about integrity systems, there are some elements that are actually here, like due diligence, and the standards that are applied to due diligence in private sector that might translate to the public sector. And also there are some good practices of the financial audit model that's developed by the private sector. So not because we are like the main financial audit institution, it says that we all have all the answers. That would be kind of, cocky from Supreme Audit institutions. Now, you know what? This is our business, and we know how to do this properly. That could be a position. It's not our position, and we've learned that we can perform so much better when we look out at what's going on elsewhere. And next slide, please. There's a dangerous border, and I'm here going back to my first slide, also with agility, technology, and collaboration, because we have a study that we've shared with you guys before, but I can share again, maybe in the chat, because we do have that in English. We did a study to see how corruption affects Chilean citizens and Chilean institutions. And we asked over 16,000 persons, what are the areas where they think that there's more corruption in Chile? I have to say, as a context, that in Chile, we did not talk about corruption like, let's say, like 7 years ago. It was not a problem for us. It was a problem for maybe some of our neighbors, but Chile was like, no, there's no corruption here. A lie, of course, but the veil has been lifted, and so corruption is one of the main concerns for citizens right now. And over like all the things we asked, everyone like not everyone, but everyone that answered our survey said that public procurement was the area where there's more corruption in Chile. And so you can see there that the relation is permanent because there's no public procurement only with the private sector or only with the public sector. It is it's somewhere where these two words collide. And so I'm going back to technology and how we can exchange databases. I'm going back to collaboration and how we can get the I don't know how the public purchase process works and how we can perfect it, and we need private sector to abide by those standards, etc. And so if you go to the last slide, and this will be the last thing about this intervention, I think there's chances to mirror the public standards as well. We do have better complaint standards. At least at 6% in the Chilean case, people say that they're more likely to report in the public sector than in the private, and they're less likely to pay bribes when they're working with the public sector than with the private sector. So I think that this is a win-win situation, actually. We can mirror some things from the private sector can mirror things about us, but all together, if we do work in collective action, and I hopefully get the chance to talk a bit further on how we're doing that, I think we can really enhance a culture of integrity and really do fight corruption. So thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you very much, Daniela. And it was great to hear that for you, collective action is also about collective learnings. I'm sure that a lot of people in the audience were also interested to see this shift in terms of discussions that were happening in Chile, because this is also something we hear a lot in some of the discussions we have, both with the private sector, civil society, but also public sector, of saying, yeah, you know, in our country, it's okay. But actually acknowledging that everyone has something to learn. So we'd be happy also to share. I know in the Q&A someone was asking for the link to the report, so we'd be happy to share that with the audience as well. And looking forward to hearing more in the next round of questions about also this collaboration in terms of building solutions together and not necessarily pointing fingers at each other, but creating this platform for exchange. So thank you so much, Daniela. I'd like to now turn the floor to Soji. So just checking that he's able to speak at this point. Great. Thank you so much for making the time, Soji.
Thank you.
We'd like to hear from your experience in Nigeria, and how do you ensure success of collective action as a civil society organization? And obviously in your role, you're acting as a facilitator. So we'd be eager to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you very much indeed. And apologies for where I am. I'm still at the Anti-Corruption Commission. We had an event that
I think we're having technical difficulties with Soji.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, so the first strategy is around stakeholder engagement, trying to make sure that all the right decision makers and those who will be impacted by the collective action are in and consulted about the collective action. That's the first thing. The second thing is then to work with them to try to align the activities of the collective action to their interests. Because if their interests are not covered, you will find either they continue to participate, but they're just a lot of cargo you have to carry and they're not doing much, or they drop off completely. So it's really important to make sure that in whatever it is that we're doing as activities is lined up to impact the stakeholders in what is important to them. So it brings me to the issue of then designing a narrow enough focus for the collective action. because you can see that, therefore, that you cannot have an omnibus which then works for everybody. You have to make sure that the collective action is designed narrow enough for success to be measurable, and so to ensure that you are changing something that will lead to either a specific measurable reduction in something or an increase in something else. So the theory of change has to be very clear. How is change going to occur? So that as soon as that change starts to occur, you know it is because of the logic to the activities that you're putting in place. Yeah, is that okay, or can I go on time-wise?
Well, feel free to add on to that. I think it was really interesting to hear that, in your views, collective action needs to be narrow enough. So if you could illustrate this with some of the examples of your collective action initiatives, I would say plural, because you're very active in that space.
Well, yes. Okay, thank you. If I talk about the collective action with the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network, we take it almost like peeling off layers of an onion. So for a period, all we had as the ambition was to make sure that there was a collaboration with the government and that the government accepted the need for change. And all that was on the agenda was to perform a corruption risk assessment. There was nothing more. But of course, we know that once you do a risk assessment, there would have to be an integrity plan. And from the integrity plan, from the risk assessment, it will identify what you need to work on. So you're taking it one issue at a time. And the government, therefore, the hierarchy of things that have to be addressed also has to meet with their politics and what they are prepared to work on for change. So we learned that very early on, that we have to situate whatever we're doing within their own agenda. So they are also, they're not on the back foot, but they are as excited working with you as you are working with them. So that is the narrow focus. But of course, those who are facilitating it have a long-term view and have an overall huge strategy, but always dealing with only one item.
I think you set us up quite nicely, talking about the leadership role of civil society, but also the importance of collaboration, and specifically identifying the added value for each of the stakeholders. And that's really what we're going to delve into, turning it over now to Vibeke, because my question to her would be, what is the added value for SMEs to engage in collective action?
Thank you very much, Vanessa. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the Basel Institute to invite me to join this esteemed panel today. I feel like a little small SME in the middle of those that are very knowledgeable in this. I'm going to share my screen with a few slides. So if you allow me. So the first thing I'd like to do is to give just a small background on who Felicia Design is. Felicia Design actually has a milestone today. It's our 27th birthday on the date. I've been in Thailand for 34 years and started my own business then 27 years ago, and started off with one employee, a desk, and not really knowing what direction to go in. I was in a foreign country. Didn't know the language. So there was a lot of challenges that should be met. Today, Felicia is a strong, grown-up woman. We have 150 employees, and we work mainly OEM towards the European market. 3 years ago, we joined CAC, Coalition Against Corruption. We've gone through our second audit already and passed the audit also for now the next 3 years. And I believe joining them was extremely important for us as a company. As a background on myself, I'm also the vice chair or vice president of the Thai Norwegian Chamber of Commerce in Thailand, who is has an MOU with the CAC. and I'm the chairwoman of Joint Foreign Chamber of Commerce in Thailand, representing 34 chambers. And again, we also have an MOU with CAC, which is Coalition Against Corruption here in Thailand. I wanted to give that as a background because it just shows where my mindset is at. And mindset, I think, is the most important when you are a company or a business owner, that being a SME or being a larger corporation. So if you look at the mindset that I have, I come from Norway. I'm raised where integrity and transparency and ethical principles are part of your childhood and they're at early age. You learn it through school and through daily life. Ethical and moral compass is built into us, and this is something that I've tried to transfer and build into my company from day one. It is also used as a tool to show to our client that even though you're a small company, you can be a transparent business. Very often an SME say that, oh, it's very difficult. No, we can't do it. It's too much responsibility, but I believe it can be done. I think mindset is that even though there's a cost to join, for example, Coalition Against Corruption, CAC, it is a cost that you should not look as a cost, but it's an investment in your business. I think regardless of size, we have a responsibility. This image shows that it does work. I think fighting corruption does work. So if you're a small fish in the sea all alone, as SME often are, then you are not going to succeed to fight the corruption. But if you join forces, collective actions against corruption, then I believe you can fight it. For an SME, belonging to a community is very important. And I think for us especially, we have seen that through CAC, we have that tool. But we also have that tool through other organizations which are related to our industry. So one thing that was touched on earlier, that sometimes it's better to do it in a smaller area. So for example, Responsible Jewelry Council, which is one organization that we belong to, through there we get a lot of knowledge. Is it an added value? Absolutely, it is an added value. Now, I would say I will split this in two. So added value is one thing inside your own company. It's added value. You set the moral compass for your business. You embrace the ethical and sustainable practices. You show to others that even though you are small, when you join forces, you can make a difference. When it comes to outside, being part of a community, the added value is that you have access to experience. You have knowledge people that share their experience with you. You have, I will give you a few examples where we have, through Responsible Jewelry Council, we embrace not only fighting corruption, but also other sustainable goals. They have the UN Sustainable Goals, 17 goals, they show us a path through our business, how we can be sustainable. Our company is also part of UN Global Compact, where the 10th principle is to fight corruption. This is free. It is not a cost. You just need to sign up and be part of a community. So I think the most important thing that I see as added value to us as a company is that big knowledge or source of knowledge that we have. And part of being sustainable and being fight corruption is to gain knowledge. Another thing that we have seen is that by being part of this, we have opportunities have opened to us. So we now have a much bigger customer pool. They look at our values. They looked at, we are part of Responsible Jewelry Council as one for our industry, but they also ask why we are part of CAC. And when we explain why, they appreciate it. This image is an example of ACT, ACT. It was the International Anti-Corruption Day, where 1,000 companies joined together, large and small, and not only companies, but also organizations like CAC. And we showed clearly that this is something that we want to fight together. through my position as chair, I advocate a lot for working against corruption, and joining one of these events as part of it. I know I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to just speak a little bit to this. Together we make a difference. It's a fact. If we join forces, we will make a difference. So I'm splitting it up from probably the wrong side, because I'll start at the bottom. Government drive and political will is a must if you want to make a change. But you can't do that unless you also have the agencies and the ministries following it and implementing those values and those principles. You need organizations to work with companies. So CSE Act and also Basel Institute, with the work that you do, is very important because it creates that community. One area that I think is extremely important is educational institutions. We need to get this in at the beginning. It needs to be brought into schools, the ethical values that you need in order to enter business. We need to build a future workforce to already know that corruption is not the right thing. Corruption should be fought. Chamber of Businesses and Association, that's a network opportunity where you can share experiences. And if you go down to the private sector, big or small, I think, again, they're being together, working collectively to try to fight corruption is very important. At the end, I'd like to say one thing, and that is the most important role here, I think, is for business sectors or industry organization to share the path. Now, not sharing the path only by saying that corruption is not good and present, but you need to give tools. I love what Daniel or Victor, you said that you have a toolkit coming. Very excited about that, because that's what you need. You need tools. You need to have technology to share these principles. And I think you can't just go out big. You need to also narrow it down and go within industries and in smaller groups so that you work hand in hand. Bigger companies can be the big brothers for the SME. Bigger brothers can also maybe give them a little bit of a break when it comes to implementation, because implementation is a journey. So I think one of the last things that I want to say on this is that if you own a big business, share your knowledge, share the path, and then make sure that the SME is part of the journey. And the same for the other organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vibeke. It was great to hear from you in terms of your own experience. So first of all, happy anniversary to Felicia Designs.
Thank you.
And it's great to see your journey as an entrepreneur, but also your other hat with the Joint Foreign Chambers and the work that you do more broadly with SMEs as a group. So in terms of the whole discussion of, is this a cost or is this an investment? I think we need more of those examples and some of the anecdotal evidence that you bring forward in terms of saying that, this ultimately led to more business for you, but also source of knowledge. And looking at leveling the playing field, there's definitely a lot that can be done in terms of awareness raising and knowledge sharing. So talking about the SME toolkit, I'd like to go back to Vitor and maybe get a sense of how does the OECD engage directly with the private sector on anti-corruption and have those conversations?
Sure. Well, the OECD engages with the private sector through many different channels. To be more specific here, the working group on bribery. We have first the country monitoring. In the context of the country evaluations, the evaluation team meets with the private sector during the on-site visits. And this includes large companies, SMEs and business organizations, civil society, academics, legal professions, accounting professionals, and etc., to collect their inputs on issues regarding the evaluated country implementation of the convention. Also, the working group promotes yearly a consultation with external stakeholders where the private sector and civil society representatives get the chance to address directly their concerns to the working group delegates. we also engage with the private sectors through the horizontal studies. And there we collected valuable inputs from the private sector and civil society. The most recent example I have is the toolkit. The toolkit, we surveyed companies and business organizations. We interviewed several representatives of business organizations, experts in anti-corruption, but not only. We had in 2020 a report called the OECD Drivers for Compliance, which over 200 companies were heard, the majority of them large companies, but also SMEs, on their motivations to adopt anti-corruption compliance programs. And finally, the OECD also promotes annually the Business Integrity Roundtable, which is an opportunity for business, for the private sector, civil society organizations, and also law enforcement and other government authorities to sit together and discuss in a very open way the challenges they face involving the implementation of the convention. We just had very interesting, the first session of this year's Business Integrity Roundtable was about incentives for compliance. And we'll have other sessions, the one on promoting business integrity in SMEs, where we're going to launch the SMEs Toolkit, will be one of them. And there are also regional business integrity roundtables that we do through our outreach initiatives for the Asia Pacific, Africa, Latin American and Caribbean, and Central Asian and East European countries. So these are basically the channels we use to engage with the private sector, to hear what you have to say to us and try to accommodate the best we can into our standards, but also into our reports and evaluation. On the toolkit, I must say that it was a very challenging study to conclude and to come up with. We discussed this with Vibeke once, and reaching out to SMEs is effectively a challenge for government authorities, and they absolutely cannot do this alone. And that's why I put so much emphasis that this is a collective effort that should involve government, should involve large companies, the big brothers, as Vibeke said, should involve professional associations and business organizations. And of course, collective action could be the great framework they could do it. And if you want, if we have time later, I can also give you more details on how this toolkit's organized and give you just a little taste of it.
Thank you so much, Vitor. And please go ahead, please share with us, because I think a couple of people in the audience, and also I see the panelists shaking their heads. So please go ahead and please share more about the toolkit.
All right, it's a pleasure. Well, the toolkit will bring a list of successful initiatives to raise awareness on corruption and prevention of corruption to SMEs. I can give you some examples of what those initiatives include. They include promotion of website and portals with basic information, general guidance, and other online tools aimed at disseminating industry-specific anti-corruption awareness raising to SMEs, promotion of free brochures and welcome packages for current and new exporters and investors with simple to understand and engaging content on corruption prevention, promotion of eLearn, promotion of legal incentives, integrity system rewards, public registry for ethical SMEs, and preferential treatment for ethical SMEs in public procurement, for instance. And also promotion of incentives for large companies to provide anti-corruption compliance mentorships to SMEs. So this is just a few of the initiatives. But the toolkit is not only a list of initiatives. We do have a pretty good one with hyperlinks, so you can access initiatives that had already been proven effectively. So you have an example, a template to follow, but also we have a chapter on who should elaborate this initiative, develop and implement these initiatives. And here, as I said, collaboration is key. And here's where we put emphasis on the use of collective action to actually propel these initiatives, and also a part of how these initiatives should be implemented. And here, for instance, we recommend our relevant stakeholders to promote public consultations and as a diagnose of their business sector. And one thing is very much important: choose and adapt initiatives based on industry or sector-specific approaches, taking into consideration the risk exposure of SMEs doing business in that sector or industry. Avoid a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. We discussed in a past occasion that SMEs is such a broad concept. It includes the local bakery and multi-million euro annual turnover euro companies in several sectors. So it's very important when you're developing your awareness raising strategy that you're taking into account the size of the businesses you're addressing and where they operate and how they operate. So it has to be something very tailor-made, let's say. And finally, also on how we recommend that the relevant stakeholders constantly evaluate and review the efficacy of their awareness raising strategy in order for it to come with the fast changes we have, and recently we saw many of them. So in order to avoid that their awareness raising strategy is just obsolete. So this is just a taste, is what I can say right now before the launch. And I hope and I, of course, I'll be open to hear your questions and inputs.
Thank you so much, Vitor. One of the questions in the chat is when will this be launched? Because I think a few of the people participating would be interested in joining the Business Integrity Roundtable.
Sure, I'll be glad to share with you the links for the Business Integrity Roundtable. And this, as I said, this will be launched together with the seminar on promoting business integrity in SMEs. We are still deciding on the date, but I can say that will probably be on the week of the 23 November. But I will follow up with you because we have to coordinate so many agendas.
We'll share with the participants once we have the final list. So don't worry, Pat. I see you in the chat. We'll be sharing this with everyone. So thank you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Talking about the practical aspect and the sector focus, I think that was quite essential and also maybe reassuring to people who are coming from the business sector here. I'd like to go back to Daniela as well, because you've been working on developing and strengthening your national anti-corruption strategy. And so in that sense, what would you have as lessons learned and advice for others, but also looking again at this practical aspect? So what are the next steps in implementation?
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, everyone. It's been so interesting so far to hear from all of you. Well, as we told you, we've struggled a little bit as Supreme Audit Institution on our role and our mandate. And so we've decided and taken an approach, a strategic approach. It's part of our strategic plan to one of the 9 spheres that it has is to align all of our work into the fight against corruption. So in that sense, we did this dismantling corruption study that was more of with an academic sort of weight, so to say, and we asked how citizens felt, and etc. And we had those results when we told you, for instance, okay, public procurement is a big issue. And we were like, okay, but we need to be responsible. I don't know if you've heard, but Chile is in the midst of a trust crisis. Well, as most of the world is actually, but here it's been really intense. We actually did have a constitutional process that recently failed, sadly. And so we were like, we need to be accountable ourselves on what we asked and like deliver. And so we were like, okay, how do we address this issue? Well, the answer, of course, for us was sort of naturally on a national anti-corruption strategy. But national anti-corruption strategies are mostly made by the executive, by the government. And we are part of the state, but we are not the government. We are an autonomous, independent body that has constitutional autonomy, actually. And so we're like, okay, let's do this. You know, there's a gap, there's a mandate, and from the UNCAC convention, and we as part of the state are also obliged by this convention. So let's do this. And we took from this participatory survey, and we did a participatory process in which we did over 150 focus groups, all in between the pandemic, so everything was online. And we met with public sector, private sector, with municipalities, with historically discriminated groups. So we met with persons deprived of liberty, women, LGBTI persons, human rights defenders, you know, so to see how corruption affects them differently, and how they engage or their seen practices, and what are their concerns. And we ended up drafting a document that's the National Anti-Corruption Strategy of the Office of the Comptroller General. And I'll ask maybe Lisa if she can help me maybe sharing the slide. I have only 2 more slides. Yes, there. And we have, in this National Anti-Corruption Strategy, we have 25 proposals to fight corruption in 3 main axes. So the first one is good governance. The second one is safeguarding public resources. And the third one is integrity and democracy. And I just wanted to share with you one of the 25 measures, that's measure 14, in which we have actually, you know, for instance, some ways to engage with private sector. For instance, whistleblowers protection system. In Chile, we don't have a good whistleblowers protection system, not with international standards. For instance, the creation of a bank, which is unique for public and private corruption reports, like a documentation bank sort of way. And so for us, collective action is not only in this measure, but in a couple of more measures, like mainstreamed, as the title of this webinar. We've gathered that's not only us, like us as the Supreme Audit Institution stating that we need to do work in collective action, but it's also everyone that we've asked. So in total, the whole participatory process was over 23,000 people. That for us is a really huge number, because, you know, Supreme Audit institutions or the fight against corruption are not the sexiest of themes. Well, for everyone here it might be, but not for it's not actually like for everyone. And so for us it was really important to be able to draft this. And I think I have one more slide. Yes, please, yes. And another way, and that's actually part of the implementation of right now we've joined forces, but this started 10 years ago. We created the Anti-Corruption Alliance, UNCAC, in Chile. It started as an initiative to answer to the exam mechanism of the UNCAC that was taking place in Chile 10 years ago. And so we're like, oh, but you're doing this, and we don't know what you're doing. So let's create like a multi-actor platform to share what we're doing. And right now it's for us a huge example on how collective action actually do work. This is a voluntary platform that we right now have 34 organizations from everywhere, like from private sector, academia. We're celebrating 10 years. Actually, next week we have our first student congress ever, which undergrad students presented their work, and they're going to be presenting, and there's going to be a huge ceremony, and it's going to be super interesting. But because also in Chilean universities, you learn about probity and how public servants have to, develop in their career, but you do not learn about the fight against corruption or anything. So this is really interesting. And so this is like something that's effective. that has worked. We have drafted, for instance, some work with SMEs. We've done workshops with SMEs. Vibeke, that might be something interesting for you. We've worked with the Congress, proposing some, all together, proposing some interesting modifications to some bills that have been drafted regarding for transparency, integrity, probity, and this has worked. And right now, because of the anti-corruption strategy that I just talked about, this anti-corruption alliance have taken to, as part of its mandate, to work mainly on the collaboration with the private sector, because we do have we do not have enterprises per se, like Siemens, for instance, at one point wanted to enter the anti-corruption alliance, but they do not work directly. They do it amidst, I don't know, for instance, the Chamber of Commerce of Santiago, because they're the German Chamber of Commerce, so it's like a gremial, I don't know the word for that in English, like the collective. And so they are implementing that. And regarding the how we're doing, because the National Anti-Corruption Strategy was launched at the end of last year. And right now, we changed government, and this current government is actually working on an integrity action plan, sort of speak, and they've used the National Anti-Corruption Strategy that the Contraloría drafted as the basis for the work. They're actually going to launch their initiative next week as well. And we have been working, because we had two choices when we drafted the strategy. We could have done all the things that were in our power to do, like in the Contraloría's sort of sphere. If you want, Lisa, you can yes. And then do that and have 100% of indicators. Okay, check. Or we can do a broader thing where we can involve everyone that's actually involved in the fight against corruption, and maybe just engage with them in conversations, say we are proposing that we can take these measures. This is something that you may do. We can walk along with you if you want to, because there are a lot of autonomous bodies, for instance, like the public prosecutor, for instance, or the Council of Transparency, or there are a lot of entities that do play a role. We decided to go that way. So we have measures that we actually can implement and are implementing, but also some things that are not within our power to change. And so we are working on that, but we hope to drive from what the government right now is their action plan on integrity, so we can work together and install this integrity of culture, which I find is one of the biggest challenges right now. Promote ethical conduct, maximize the impact that initiatives like this have, and at the end, be efficient on how we use our resources and how we engage with everyone. So that's a bit. I'm sorry if I was going back and forward, but everything's connected. So I hope you guys were able to follow along.
Well, thank you so much, Daniela. That was very helpful to walk us through some of the process, but also looking at implementation. And it was also really great to see the interest, the general interest that this sparked in Chile, but also the high participation rate. So I think that's something that's definitely good to note. And I saw that Vibeke was nodding, looking at the role of chambers of commerce as multipliers and so on. So this is definitely complementary to what we've heard so far. And I just wanted to come back to something that you said in terms of the power of data and looking at, the information that you have on hand, because this is something that Soji has been working on with the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network. And I know that, for instance, anonymous reports that you did mention in one of your slides, and gathering this evidence and this data has been central to some of Soji's work. So Soji, if you're still with us, could you great. So Soji, how do you measure the success and impact of collective action initiatives? And I don't want to prompt you too much about MACN, but I know that, the data aspect is quite central to all of this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Basically, in terms of measuring success, we look at it in two ways. There's the absolute numbers. If you're able to achieve a level of change, for instance, reducing corruption, you can measure success in that way. But we also measure something called significance. How significant is that change in the whole landscape of dealing with corruption in the country? So on the issue of project success, yes, I can say 2019, we had like 260 which fell to 128 in 2020, fell to 84 in 2021, and has fallen further in this 2022. Yes, that is a measure of success. But if you took us out and took the whole initiative out, will that success continue? So we wanted to translate into significance. So some of the arrangements that the government put in place, they're now trying to come up with a government paper to make it a standing process and a procedure that the government follows. Good. For me, that is a bigger success. We brought in the idea that it's not enough to do enforcement as governments do. What we would like to see is a compliance function, like the private sector, for them to have compliance functions in the ports agencies. So right now, I'm at the headquarters of the Anti-Corruption Commission because they suddenly summoned a meeting of everyone, including the heads of the different ports agencies, to get them to adopt this compliance approach. For me, that is an even bigger success than having the numbers reduce. So also in terms of the agenda, of the sequence of steps to continue, we are not the ones who are driving the activities anymore. It's actually the government officials. And so they've taken the blueprint and they're driving it. To me, that's an even bigger success. And now that we want to train compliance officers, we have the Anti-Corruption Academy of Nigeria, who have said that they're going to shadow everything we're doing so they can take up compliance and try to roll it out across the rest of government. So for me, that is what I would call success in this kind of project. Then we can walk away and just dust our shoes and move on to something else, because there is enough appetite, there is enough infrastructure on the part of government to continue to do what the collective action was doing before. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Soji. And it is true. I think all of us in the best conditions, if there were no corruption and everything would be running on its own, we'd be out of a job, but I think we'd be happy about it because that means that we did a good job. So it's great to hear,
Yes.
How the work you've done with MACN trickled down. And I think that's the power of collective action in a way. It's not just about the collective learnings, but it's about the multiplier effect it can have upstream and downstream, and looking at different government engagements. Is there any word of advice you would have? Because I know there's a couple of civil society organizations that are also following this webinar. So is there any word of advice in how to start? Because right now, it's really great to see what can be the end game in a way from your story, but I know that this has been something you've been working on for years. So what would be your advice in that sense?
Yeah, if I were to start again, and we are starting in new countries, actually in West Africa. So if I were to start again, I now understand the theory of change. I now understand what things lead to change. And as much as possible, I'm going to bring in that horrible phrase called political will, but define it very differently. That political will doesn't always start with government. If you have 170 odd companies that represent 75% of everything containerized, moving by sea, now that will induce political will in any government that this is a party that they should not ignore, because most of coastal countries, most of their economy actually comes from dealing with the sea. So if that bloc decides actually to penalize your country through higher shipping costs because of the corruption risks and everything else, it will damage your economy. It's a big enough lobby for you to want to listen to them. So the first thing is to make sure that there is enough power on your side. And we try to make sure, because usually, traditionally, what African governments do is say, oh, this is a whole foreign agenda. It's not from here, and you guys are just agents of some foreign initiative. We made sure that we had an integrity alliance now in Nigeria, having over 200 odd members from the freight forwarding community, the cargo clearing community, and so on. So very quickly, we built up a similar thing in Nigeria to make sure that we could fend off that kind of dismissal at the end of the day. So it's important that you have the representation, you have the voice, and you have the leverage, because that's the only reason they will listen to you, and you will get some kind of political will going. Now, once you've got the political will and you have a theory of change that works, then it is to be patient and take it one item at the other. The other thing that helps us to get success is that we don't seek to take credit for anything. So even today in the agenda, yes, we designed the agenda, but we didn't put ourselves there. It was government speaking to government, but they insisted that we had to speak. Now that is more honorable. When they are referring to you and referring to what you've done, is more honorable than trying to elbow in the fray and looking for some kind of recognition, because some of the things they are doing are so dangerous that you don't want to put yourself in the middle of the mix as anyone suggesting those changes because of the stakes. Especially when you're coming up against really entrenched behaviors that have gone on for decades before you came around with your reforms. So I think that to be successful is to get the right partners in the room, the right political will, and painstaking, of course, data. We confronted them with evidence every step of the way. There was evidence. So whether speaking to customs or speaking to any other agency, we were able to tender details. I remember going to see the Deputy Comptroller General for Border Management, and the first challenge he made to us was, are you sure of what you're saying? Do you have any evidence? Can you prove it? And it was a yes to each question. And then we did a report, compiled it, and sent to him. So now we are the ones chasing him. Now that we've given you all the evidence, what are you doing about it? So it gives also a lot of credibility when you're able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Soji. That was very enlightening. And you mentioned finding the right partners. And for that, I'd like to turn it back to Vibeke, because you're an SME, but you're also wearing the hat of representing the Joint Foreign Chambers. So looking at right partners, in your view, wearing those hats, what would be the expectations towards the other stakeholders? So what is it that SMEs need to engage in this? What do you think is required from policymakers, but also civil society, to make collective action successful, and in your case, the certification model successful?
I'll start it off with the guidance, information, and tools. And I think we have mentioned a lot of that already. The toolkit, if I can go back to Vitor, one thing that I'd like to add to that is an acronym, because some of the words that we use, an SME will not understand. We use a lot of abbreviations, use a lot of difficult words. So I think it's important to not make them dangerous, but actually make them easy to understand. And secondly, a clinic, training clinic, you can do that online. I think that is a very important tool also, that you can join, you can understand, you can see examples. That's very important. You may already have this, but I was very excited when I heard about your toolkit. So since you didn't mention it, I know that that's something that really does work. CAC, they actually do work. I'm not here to sell the services of CAC today, but I sat down with my team, my staff, and I said, you know, how has the process been? We've just done our second audit, and I was curious to see how it worked and how they feel the process is. And they spoke very highly about it. So this is not me doing a process, this is my staff doing it. The CAC, they have compliance program, they have SME clinics, they have manuals, they have examples. All of that is important, because if not, it's very high level talk and very dangerous. It sounds overwhelming to an SME. Implementation and readiness. You have to allow time. You have to allow that journey. If you don't, if you expect that a SME should understand, create policies, guidance as in-house, if you expect them to have everything ready and go through an audit and pass, most of them would fail. So I think that's what we expect. Is we expect that companies like, or organizations like CAC, they actually provide that to us. We can improve this also by doing independent audits, showing what a pre-audit would be. Audits should not be too expensive. We spoke about cost before. The cost of the audit is normally the most expensive. So you may have your house in order, but when you try to do the audit, it may be too expensive for you to actually proceed with it. And then belonging to a community. I think the other thing that is very important for an SME, and if you're looking at stakeholders, is the bigger companies, that they share knowledge, and that when they create an opportunity for an SME is very important to the GDP of a country. They're very important to the larger companies. But when we talk about procurement processes and we talk about how to enter and get your first order, very often we kill them in that process. We kill them with if it's not a digital process, we are very often kill them by not being able to pay what is required. I'm being very straightforward now. Very often there is a fee to enter, and that shouldn't be necessary. I think when that process is digital, then there is less chance of that extra fee to be put on top. I have a lot of comments and notes here. I'm trying to not speak too long. If we are looking at chambers do play an important role here in Bangkok. I was very excited to see the slide that Daniela showed, because I believe in that type of collaboration. I believe that if educational institutions and private sector and also public sector is working together, I think, and chambers put them in, I think that's the way to have success. The chamber's role, I would say, is to advocate for reforms and policy changes and to support the SME. It is the international connection very often to bridge a local company to be able to go out internationally. Every country operates in a different way. Rules may be different. But one thing that I see is that if you want to go international, there's no way to go international without embracing sustainability, and inside that also the corruption, no corruption. So it's not a question, should we join forces? It is, we have to join forces if we want our business to succeed. And we need to communicate that. We need to communicate it not as you must, but we need to communicate it that this is your ticket in. The objective to eradicate, or at the very least to significantly reduce corruption, is that those that are corrupt get prosecuted. I think this is very often a big problem, is that there are too many times that you will pay an extra fee, or you will you have to pay an extra fee in order to be part of a bidding process, as an example. So I think it's very important, if you want an SME to join this collective forces, then you also need to show to them that it's worth it. You need to show to them that if you have money, then you can get away with everything. If you don't have money, then you don't have a chance. Again, this is the feeling that many small companies have. SME covers a lot. It's from 2 to 3 employees to up to 200 employees sometimes. I mean, every country have different ways of looking at SMEs, but I think, what do we need as an SME? We need that policymakers, they need to show that the government should be in a driver's seat. I know we talk about political will. Yes, also the private sector can help on this. We need to work together. There has to be policies and frameworks available. But international standards are very important, that we don't work in silos. We don't have every country working on their own area. And then we try to do business internationally. And it's not possible because the rules are not the same. At the same time, I think it's also important to see that as a company, if I operate in Thailand, I follow the Thai law, and I am in full compliance with the Thai law. I cannot be in full compliance with every single country around the world. So when you look at the compliance process, this is not so much on corruption related, but compliance in general. Very often bigger corporations, when they enter Thailand, they say, you need to comply to this. I mean, as an SME, you do not have a chance to enter the markets then. Digital transformation, especially here in Thailand, I think that's something we need to emphasize and enforce. But I think digital transformation, when things are digital, we will take away a big part of the areas where money can change hands. Required from civil society, I think civil society, I think high ethics and integrity is very important. It's important that they are looked at as neutral. I think it's also important that when we do this, we look at the competency, which would be within an industry. So if you are looking at the jewelry industry, you should know or have competency from the jewelry industry, and always work and advocate for the public interest. And I think also very important being a good facilitator, meaning just not only tell us what to do, but also be a good listener so that we learn from it. And the last thing I would say is education. Education is such an important part of this. I bring it up many times, but I think that's the key area. If you educate, then you will get good results. I have implemented a Norwegian ethic and moral in my company. I have educated my staff. It's not a sales tool or a marketing tool that we have to be part of coalition against corruption. It is something that we live through the company. We do the walk and we do the talk, the talk and the walk. So I think I am proud of my staff because I see that they embrace these morals and these ethics too. And I think it's possible as long as you educate.
No, thank you so much, Vibeke. That was also a nice summary of some of the points that we made earlier. And I think something that you brought up that was maybe new to this discussion is speaking the language. And I think this is something that comes up quite often. We're facing sometimes some challenges in terms of understanding each other coming from different stakeholder groups. And adding to that, obviously, the cultural differences and the layers in terms of local languages, but speaking the same language and making sure that, as you said, we don't use technical lingo that is only understandable to either the public sector or private sector is essential in having those discussions and collaboration. You also mentioned the prosecution aspect, and there's a question in the chat here that I'd like to bring up to the attention of Daniela and maybe also Vitor in terms of how do you see, so Kaspers is asking, how do you see law enforcement's role in collective action? Do you have any thoughts about that, Daniela or Vitor?
I'm sorry, someone just walked into my office and I didn't hear your question. I'm sorry.
The question was, how do you see law enforcement and its role in collective action?
Daniela, one sec.
And I was thinking about it for a while. Law enforcement is something that's not as well as the fight against corruption, like thought that supreme audit institutions might do. But I think that in the context of the fight against corruption, in precisely law enforcement, we need to work with the public prosecutor's office in a way that we have to maintain communication. For instance, we cannot prosecute per se, but we can give the information to their office for them to start whatever is, depending on the type of I don't know the word for that in English, but la tipología of whatever has been going on or in the facts. And so for that we need communication, and there's also the need for what you see in private sector to engage as well with that office, you know. So we need to, for me, law enforcement, you can find a lot of categories, but like the more, like the highest intense way of showing it is to actually, you know, like execute or comply with like a sentence, you know. But for me, it has a different like shades. So for us, law enforcement, it would be also to comply with our duties as public servants, for instance, to comply with the principle of probity and keep like this culture of integrity, you know, that could also be, because it's a principle. So it's not only that you're enforcing something that you've broken. If you've broken the law, then you can be enforced for what you did. But also it's like a preventive, there's a preventive also way of looking at law enforcement. And that complies me directly because I'm a public servant, but everyone that engages in actions that might be corruption, if it comes from civil society, private sector, we need to be able to engage with the system as well. And so for that, for instance, having good complaint mechanisms, having whistleblower protection, having gender sensitive complaint channels, you know. So it's a lot of, it's a really huge topic. We can do a webinar on that as well. So that would be something for me, just a short address. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Daniela. And I see Vitor unmuted himself, so please go ahead.
Very quickly, I just say that for the perspective of the working group on bribery, enforcement is very important. Enforcement is key. So it is often a very hard endeavor to try to find a balance between carrots and sticks, especially when we're talking about, for instance, SMEs. It's a good example. When we were doing the researches for the SME studies, we heard from several specialists that sometimes there's a general feeling among SMEs that they are too small to be prosecuted. And this is something we definitely need to work in public policies and also work with law enforcement agencies in order to bring enforcement to them in the stick area, but also provide them with enough carrots for them to willfully go and as the example of Vibeke, and do the right thing. But also the question on the collective actions, our standard, the 2021 recommendation, it's explicit that we should use our member countries should use collective action for awareness raising, addressing the demand side, and also by business organization and professional associations. But we also need to remember that our standard sets up, let's say, a minimum states has to go. So if you're going to go the step forward, I think it can be, and as a personal opinion, it can be important to also for promote legislation changes, and it can also go further than that, even though our standards are very much focused into awareness raising and addressing the demand side. So I hope that's clear.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for taking those questions. We're 1 minute away from closing this webinar. I think there are a lot more things that we can discuss and would like to keep this conversation going. So we've invited you as well to sign up to our newsletter, because we will be sharing more information about some of what the speakers mentioned in terms of next steps and next activities. At this point, I'd like to thank all of the speakers who joined us and spent their early morning, late evening, or lunchtime with us for this webinar. This is just, I would say, a second step after our conference, but we'll like to engage with all of you once again. For those of you who had additional questions, feel free to email them to us as well. We have a help desk function that's also available for this, and we'll also ensure that we can disseminate those questions to some of the speakers if that can be of interest. So really appreciate everyone's engagement in the Q&A, and thank you so much for answering all of our questions today to all of the speakers. And we'd like to thank once again the Siemens Integrity Initiatives for supporting us for this webinar, and we'll see you very soon for one of our next events. And for those of you who are still on the line, if you could just quickly turn on your cameras for a picture. And so we can also see some of the faces we see familiar names, but also some new faces around. We'll just take a few seconds to allow everyone to join in with their camera.
So I'm not finding the setting to allow me to show my camera.
We're going to be activating it. I think it's because we're in webinar mode. So we're currently working on it. Should be able to activate it in 1 second. All right. Perfect. I see some familiar faces. She could just stay on for 30 more seconds while people connect with their cameras on. I see. Great.
I still cannot activate.
Hi, Sean. Anna's click on your image. You should be able to put your camera on in a second.
The function to activate the camera is not working.
Yeah, we're manually allowing you. I think it's because we were in webinar mode. So it takes a few more seconds to manually allow access. Sorry about that.
Apologize. Sorry to interrupt you. I have to leave because I have another meeting in a few minutes. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you so much for joining us, Giovanni.
Thank you. Have a nice day, all of you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. All right. I think we have a good group here. Everyone on?
No.
All right. One more second. I see Ina just joined us. Could just
Hi,
bear with us
Vanessa.
for a few more seconds. Hi, Dina. So we truly have people from all over the world, which is I think one of the marvels of being able to host these events online. Are we good to go? Yeah. All right. Well, Lisa's going to take a screenshot. So if you could please all smile. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. And we'll all see you very soon. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us today.
Thank you much. Thank you, Vanessa and Anna, for a great webinar.
Yes, thank you
Thank
both.
you so much.
And all the team.
And
Thanks
the
a
team.
lot.
Lovely to be on the panel with you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.